Excited about this session, so we're excited to speak with all of you today. As you can see, this is a joint session because we all kind of play different roles when it comes to protecting the waterways and marine ecosystems, and we really wanted to be here as a group so we could have a more well-rounded discussion. So with me today is we have Amanda Greer from Canadian Coast Guard, Zach Laframboise from Fisheries and Oceans, and then Andrew Preston from Environment and Climate Change Canada. So we will get started. So we're going to start with mine because I'm up first. So Transport Canada's role is to provide a safe, secure, efficient, and environmentally responsible transportation system. And we do this through different programs and policies that address the movement of people or goods. So this list of legislation and programs is not extensive. It kind of just gives you a high-level overview of some of the main ones. So the first one we're going to talk about is Canada's Shipping Act, which you'll see this one probably come up a couple times today because we all have different roles under this act. But for TC, this is where we have the responsibility for things like vessel registration, vessel inspections. So whether that's inspecting that the vessel is safe or that the people on the vessel itself are safe. It also is looking at documents to make sure that they have appropriate environmental response plans in place. So there's a couple different things that inspectors are looking for, as well as health and safety of the crew. We also have the responsibility of what areas vessels can transit, anchor, and more. As well as making sure that vessels have proper environmental safety plans in place, properly store and discharge any disposals or pollutants. So the next one we're going to talk about is the Marine Liability Act. We'll talk about this one a bit more at the end. We actually have one example of how we all work together, which is looking through how we respond to a ship-sourced oil spill. So we'll get to that one a bit later, but we do have the Canada Navigable Waters Act. And under this act is actually where our navigation protection program is as well. So under this act, we have programs that keep waters that are deemed navigable waters open for transit and recreation. So we do this by approving and setting terms and conditions for any works that are in water. So for example, if someone's doing construction on a bridge or putting in a swimming area, those are things that this program has. And they manage any obstructions for these waters. And they also enforce the private buoys regulations as well. And we will also, and they also do, the Navigation Protection Program also does our Wrecked, Abandoned, Hazard Vessel List Act as well. And then for programs, we also have our Office of Boating Safety. So the Office of Boating Safety tackles a couple different things. They do the vessel operator restriction regulations. Which is where if you're putting in a place where you're going to put restrictions to either types of activity or like not having powered vessels in that area. And they also do training programs. So they have a training program for enforcement training. So if you have an Indigenous police service, they'll do training to help that police service administer the Canada Shipping Act rules that they're allowed to do. And they also do like Marine 101 training. So if you want them to come to your community and go over how to be safe around water. And linked to that, they also have the Train the Trainer, where they will come and they will train someone in your community to be able to do those Marine 101 safety programs as well. So next, I'm going to hand it over to DFO.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zach Laframboise, as Kate said. I'm with Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and I'm just going to give a brief overview of the responsibilities of Fisheries and Oceans Canada. So Fisheries and Oceans Canada supports the freshwater research, conservation, protection, restoration, and the recovery of aquatic species at risk and their habitats. As a department, we're also responsible for the management and prevention of aquatic invasive species and the management of small craft harbors, as well as the production of navigational materials and providing services and information to ensure the safety of vessels and boaters on inland waters. The two acts that are applicable to our department, primarily within the inland waters, are the Fisheries Act and the Species at Risk Act. And the four programs within aquatic ecosystems through our department are the Fish and Fish Habitat Protection Program, which has a number of programs which I'll get into in a second. It also has the Aquaculture Program, the Species at Risk Program, and the Aquatic Invasive Species Program. So within the Fish and Fish Habitat Protection Program, which is commonly called FFHPP, we have the triage department, or the triage team that handles all of the intake of any applications, looking at impacts to fish and fish habitat. We have the regulatory review, which looks more in depth on the larger issues. We have the integrated planning team that manages things within the department that are a larger scale and looking at things from more of a whole of ecosystem approach. And the monitoring team that actually goes out and monitors all of the areas. The aquaculture team is just like it sounds. It manages all the aquaculture facilities within Ontario and the other provinces, mostly in Ontario at this point in time. Species at risk, again, just like it sounds, is looking at all federally listed species at risk. Again, just the aquatic species at risk. And then for the aquatic invasive species program, we have 3 separate programs. So we have the national program that's looking at it from any of the species that are listed as aquatic invasive species beyond the other 2 programs. And then the other 2 programs are the Asian carp program and the sea lamprey control program. Those are the 2 highest risk species within our provinces from Ontario to Alberta, which is my region specifically. So those are the 2 ones that we have dedicated funding specifically for those specific species. On top of that, we also have 2 other programs, the Provincial and Territorial Partnerships Program and the Indigenous Relations Unit, which is my unit, personally. Each of those support our partnerships with, for the provincial and territorial side, it's supporting our partnerships with the other governments. And then for the Indigenous Relations Unit, it's supporting reconciliation and our partnerships with Indigenous groups. That's it for DFO. I'll pass it over to Canadian Coast Guard now. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I need to move my slide. There we go. Okay, so I can be pretty long-winded, so I'll try to keep it short, but we are open to questions after we're done here, so if you have specific questions, don't be shy. So Coast Guard has a variety of different areas. We have, everybody knows search and rescue. That's not me. Aids to navigation, marine communication traffic services, so the folks that are listening to the radios and talking to you over the radio while you're on your boat. Also not me. So I manage the team of environmental response officers in Ontario. We recently merged with the Vessels of Concerns program. We have a new name. It's MER, Marine Environmental and Hazards Response. So I'll be talking about that today. We've got some legislation listed here, same as Transport Canada, Canada Shipping Act, Oceans Act. So those give us the powers that we need to do, or we may need to use in the field when working with ship owners and ships captains. And also the Wrecked, Abandoned, and Hazardous Vessels Act. That's new for us. That was the Vessels of Concern program. If there's a derelict vessel that has no pollution aboard, that's that piece right there. So we are the lead agency for marine spills if it has to fall under a certain category. So it's a ship source, a mystery source, so you don't know where the pollution came from, or if it's at an oil handling facility where there's a large vessel that is connected with a large hose, product is coming on or off the ship, then we are the lead agency. We do get a lot of calls for land-based spills, and unfortunately that's not us, but we do have our friends at the Ministry of Environment, MECP, the Conservation and Parks, they're called now. So they look after the land-based spills. So as mentioned here, our program is responsible for ensuring appropriate response to all of these things. And if an owner doesn't clean up, we make sure that the cleanup is done. So lots to talk about with that. But there is also the Marine Liability Act. I think you said we're talking about that in a bit. So the Marine Liability Act has a polluter pays principle in it. So you buy a boat, you're responsible for that boat and anything it may leak into the water. So that's that piece of it. Protects the public, marine environment, infrastructure. So we always, when we respond to something, we always talk about the safety of the responders, the safety of the communities. We keep boats out of the area for safety is the number one, and then we move into the environmental piece and of course the economic piece as well. And then new to us is the Ocean Protection Plan initiatives. There's sort of some new funding in that pocket. We've got a couple listed here. So Coastal Marine Response Teams. So this is something that we're starting to get communities a little bit more involved with those initiatives. And we love acronyms, is the CPER or the SPEAR, the Communication Portal for Integrated Incident Response. So this is basically a internet computer program where we can input information that certain people, not the general public, but communities may have access to information during a response. So that's in the baby stages, but there are folks in our headquarters working very hard on that program as well. So I'll leave it at that, but by all means ask questions when we get to the question period. Thank you.
Hi, folks. Thank you all for being here at the end of the 2 days. I hope everyone has had a good event so far. So as Kate mentioned, my name is Andrew Preston. I'm from Environment and Climate Change Canada. And you know what I need is I need my glasses, and I need to advance this. Thank you, Kate. Let me just put my glasses on here. It's a blur otherwise. So a key role that ECCC, Environment and Climate Change Canada, has in protecting Ontario waterways and marine environments comes from the Department's legal authorities and operational mandate related to environmental emergencies and pollution spills. And that's what I'm really going to be focusing on briefly here during my part of the presentation. So in the broadest terms, when it comes to environmental emergencies and spill incidents, pollution incidents, ECCC's interests and concern is really to ensure, as you might expect, that the environment is protected to the fullest extent possible. And to do this, the department relies on various pieces of specific legislation. You can see them here on the slide. So in this respect, the department is responsible for the pollution prevention provisions of the Fisheries Act. It works closely with DFO in this respect. And these provisions outline a polluter's duty to report releases and respond to them adequately and remedy any damages caused to fish and fish habitat. So that's key, a key thing that the department works on in terms of making sure that the provisions of that act are properly addressed. There's also the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, CEPA, which the department is responsible for, which includes a number of sections and regulations that require reporting and responses to emergencies, making it necessary for organizations and entities which use designated hazardous material, if there's an incident with them, that they are obligated to report those to the Spill Action Centre, actually, here in Ontario. That's the location for that reporting. Finally, let me just note the Migratory Birds Convention Act and the Species at Risk Act. Both of these pieces of legislation require the protection of wildlife from pollution emergencies. So those are the acts that really animate the department's environmental emergency and pollution spills work. In terms of sort of the nuts and bolts of the operation in this area, it's the department's National Environmental Emergency Center, NEEC and EEC. This is the department's team that takes emergency notifications. So when there's an issue, pollution incident, that's where the report goes into. It takes those emergency notifications, reviews them, assesses them, and then if there is a need, if there's a threat or impact to environmental health or human health, then the report is escalated, and that organization, the National Environmental Emergency Center, takes part in any of the emergency response operations. So with the department, with ECCC's being at its core a science-based department, and that's really, I think, key, its specific role in environmental emergency response situations is to provide and coordinate scientific and technical advice. And being a science-based department, we have a real wealth of scientific and technical knowledge inside the department, and we have connections as well, obviously, outside the department. So depending on the situation, this expertise can be provided remotely, or it also can be provided on-site during an emergency, and is done in partnership with internal wildlife and emergency science colleagues, as well as many internal and external partners that might be involved. So the kinds of technical advice, and I think we'll get into this a little bit more in the next slide, but I'll just mention it quickly here. So things like dispersal pattern analysis, things like identifying sensitivities around wildlife populations and areas. So this is all information that we feed into the response to make sure that the impact of any pollution incidents is mitigated to the fullest extent possible. So with that, I'll maybe pass it back to Kate.
Awesome.
Thank you.
So as I mentioned before, we were going to do our last slide is, sorry, my speaking notes disappeared. Our last slide is an example of how we all work together. So as I mentioned, there's many examples, but I thought just kind of walking through the different roles we play would help give a bit more clarity to our different roles. So since there is some overlap in some of the different roles, we're going to go in the same order that we went before with the presentations. And this little link here actually takes us to an interactive, oh, that did not work. Interactive infographic. That we'll go to go through it. Okay, awesome. So yeah, when we hover over different parts, it shows kind of the different rules. So as I mentioned earlier, vessels is really part of what TC does. We're involved in the registration of a new vessel. We're involved in inspecting vessels when they come in, looking at the health and safety parts, looking to make sure there's the proper environmental response plans in place, that they are registered with a response organization, all those kind of pieces. So we do have marine inspectors in the field that do this. And if a vessel doesn't meet any of the requirements, we do have the ability to detain the vessel until whatever the issue is rectified. And from there, we'll go to response organizations. So TC is actually the authority who certifies these organizations. So every 3 years, we ensure that the response organization meets all the requirements that we have for a response organization. And in the event of a spill, they're the ones that are there to help to respond to the issue. And so for Ontario, it's the Eastern Canadian Response Organization that we have for our region here. And then the next one, we'll talk about NASP. So this is an aerial surveillance program. So they have like small dash planes that fly across the different waterways and monitor to see if there's any spills in the area that might not have been reported. They also work as a bit of a deterrent because industry knows that there is there's surveillance that happens that we don't tell them when it's being done. So it deters them from either discharging pollutants or not reporting a spill that does occur. And then the last one I'll talk about, which again, there's a bit of overlap from departments, is the, oh, how do I get this one to disappear? Compensation for cleanup. So as Amanda mentioned earlier, we have the polluter pays principle. So in the event of a spill, the polluter is always responsible. There are 2 funds that also cover this. The industry pays into every year, kind of like an insurance policy. So if there is a spill, you can apply to those funds to get compensated. And for those spills, it covers a wide range of things. So it covers pollution prevention measures, any subsistence. Oh, go ahead.
Ani Bob Chiblogama, Mississauga number 8 First Nation, Highway 17, North Shore Tribal Council, Mississauga Nation, Anishinaabe Nation area. We're right across the highway from Cameco, which is a uranium refinery in Blind River. It's right along our the Mississauga Delta. We're in talks with them right now regarding a couple of things. But how are would you be the one that would regulate any mitigation, cleanup, decommissioning, that kind of stuff for, since there is a uranium footprint right in that, it's actually on our surrendered land, actually. So where would you guys play a role in that?
This is like just ship-sourced oil spills. Carrie, do you have anything you want to?
Well, this is water.
But does the pollution come from a ship? Like, okay.
Well, it deals with water. Whether it comes from a ship or
Yeah.
a uranium refinery on the shoreline. It's still the same, you know, you're polluting the water or potentially polluting what, we're just thinking about mitigation and the health effects of that, you know, the refinery being there. Where would you, if there was an oil spill from a ship, what would you do to check the health of the people affected on the shore? Where would you do with the fish that are being affected by the oil in the water or whatever? That would be the same for a land base that is right next to the water that would you know, contaminate the North Channel. What's the difference, and what do you do in that situation with the ship if there was a spill? Because it's the same thing. The water's being contaminated or potentially being contaminated. We're just looking at. We got many of our citizens are concerned about that, even though I guess to be. I worked there for 18 years, so I know how things work there. But now I'm, you know, chief of my community, and we got our community members that want answers. You know, we could assure them all we want, but we would like to have an outside agency be available to assure them that you know, without hearing it from the company, because the company is going to tell you what you want, you know, the best case scenarios and what they're doing to mitigate any of that kind of stuff. But what do you use? You know, what do you use are doing, like, you know, plan for, say, if a ship did a spill, what kind of research would you do to ensure that the local community, the water is being, you know, kept safe?
So for the first part, I'll address specifically with regards to nuclear. So for anything within the federal government, it should be the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission that is going to be leading that. But I can also take down the information. I haven't had anything come across my desk personally, which it would have. It's my area. I'm managing everything from Sault Ste. Marie to Toronto, and then down to Hamilton and Manitoulin Island. So that would have come across my desk if I'd seen anything. I can definitely take down more information and get more information for you on that. But it should be led by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission.
And we work with them, obviously.
Yes.
So I'm just thinking, you know, when you're talking about, you know, mitigating damage to the waters, like, what can you do to?
Exactly.
Yeah.
In the same case, depending on, so I'm not familiar with specifically the refinement process there. But for anything like that, I believe that they would have applied for something with Fisheries as well. It wouldn't just have been the Nuclear Safety Commission, it would have been Fisheries and Oceans Canada as well. But depending on when that was constructed, you said that you worked there for 20 years?
18 years.
18 years?
We work with the Ministry of Environment
Yeah.
as well, and CNSC, and the provincial licensing for water, you know, taking water out of the system there. So they meet with all that. In the case of, there was an accident, that's kind of what I was kind of wanting some kind of answers from you guys. Because it is, if you take care of the shoreline all the way, this is right on the shore, whether it's a boat or the refinery on the shore, you know, that's kind of the question I was trying to get at. Where can you play a role in that if we needed to go to another source of, you know, of safety?
So I'll look to Andrew here, because so as far as spill response goes, there are two agencies that would be responsible within, like, if there is an incident, there would be two groups responsible. One would be ECCC or Environment Canada and Climate Change, sorry, and it would be Canadian Coast Guard as well, depending on which, whether it's in water or out of water. But I'll let them speak to that a little bit more.
Sure, yeah, thanks for your question. So in terms of any kind of incident that occurs that requires a response, an environmental emergency response, like I said, the department coordinates the gathering and then the application of expertise and knowledge. In the case of shoreline cleanup or dealing with sort of the immediate effect, the department, the internal expertise that the department would draw on would be, expertise of the wildlife biologists, expertise around sensitive shorelines. The department does do mapping to identify areas that are particularly sensitive, sensitive ecosystems, or sensitive because they're important to migratory birds, for example. And then any other knowledge that it can draw on, that it needs to draw on from other departments or outside.
There are part of the licensing requirements. There are air emission standards.
Yeah.
There's thresholds where you need to report to Environment Canada if there's incident reports and that kind of stuff. We talk about animal, like testing of. We wanted to do a study, our community, as because sturgeons, there's resident sturgeon in the river.
Yeah.
To do 5-year study every year. Hopefully we can do a recapture and study and check if the actual state of the fish in the river is being affected by the refinery being right there. That's coming from the community. Us who work there and they can tell us what they want, but the community needs some kind of assurance, or they want some kind of assurance, and that's kind of, maybe you guys can't do it. I just thought I'd ask because you guys are presenting, so.
No, it's an excellent question, and so the environmental emergencies group, the folks who work on these issues, they also have a significant interest in preparedness and prevention, which I think that's sort of what you're getting at. And I'd be happy to connect you with those folks, so that you can get the answers that you need.
Okay, yeah, just thought I'd make you guys do some work.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we left, oh yes, compensation. So as I was mentioning, these two funds are funded by the shipping industry to pay out for ship-sourced oil spills. That being said, our domestic fund also covers smaller vessel spills. So even if it's a pleasure craft that has a oil spill, that domestic fund can also be used to compensate for any of the things I was talking about. So I think that was, tourism costs, subsistent losses, property damage, environmental remediation, those types of things as well. I think those are all the ones for Transport Canada. So Zach, you were next.
Thanks again. So for DFO, our role with spills response is primarily to be in a supporting role. So it's to support the responding agency, which again, depending on whether it's on land or in the water, would be Environment Canada and Climate Change or Canadian Coast Guard. So primarily what we're feeding into in those departments is we're providing the fish and fish habitat information, the fish stock information, any impacts that we anticipate to species at risk, as well as any mapping from sensitive areas that we might have. So we're providing those up to the responding agency and making sure that they have that expertise available to them. As well, if it is a larger incident, there may be a science table that is created depending on the size of the incident, and DFO would be participating in that science table, and again, providing our expertise as needed as a fisheries biologist. That's pretty much it as far as our response goes, so I'll pass it over to Coast Guard. Yep.
In regards to fish stocks, well, what are you referring to? That do you keep track of fish stocks or species at risk, and how does that how do commercial fishery operations affect that? Does that have anything to do with your department and what they can and can't catch, and if they're catching invasive species or if they're catching those that are at risk with their nets? Is that anything with your department? So
primarily fish stocking is done and fisheries management is done by the province in Ontario. In other provinces, and mostly talking about the coasts here, it would be done by our department, but for the inland waters, it's done by the provinces themselves. So for that data, for any fish stocking and talking about what we can and can't catch, that would be done through the Ontario government. But what we do play a role in is anything to do with species at risk. Obviously, that doesn't necessarily, our regulations as far as federally listed species depend on what the regulation is as far as what it's listed as. So depending on whether it's endangered or if it's listed as sensitive species or different, depending on the different listing it has. But yeah, to answer your question, going back to this fishery stock stuff, it's primarily the Ontario government. Yep.
Ani, Bojo, Anemki Gavo, Dejnikaz, Makodo, MG, Boston, Donjba. I just got a question, I got a couple questions actually, so it might be a bunch of you guys. I was just trying to wait till the end, but questions are coming up, so might as well just go.
No, that's good.
So I guess like you're talking like the M&R. So what do we do when we don't get a response from the M&RF the way we want? So that, because you know what I mean? So like for purpose fisheries, I'm sure you guys deal with them or you might know of them. They sit on like every panel and every board all the way to the top, federal and provincially. So they're pretty well protected because they sit on all the tables, right? So our water treatment plant a few years ago, I know you're not supposed to dredge, but they own the monopoly, so they do what they want. So they dredge, and I caught them dredging because they hit my intake. And I called the MNRF, and nothing was done. Oh, where do you live? I live on Manitoulin, on the west end of Manitoulin in Jubossing. Oh, we can't help you. I had pictures, I had videos. Chief and council, it's a counselor here, Kevin, and we were talking about it, and nothing was ever done about it with Purvis. And like, you know, when you talk about fish, we get blamed for taking all the fish all the time, but then you got Purvis Fisheries in Meldrum Bay taking 80,000 walleye out of the lake, and then we're getting blamed for it when we put a 300-foot net out and maybe get 100 fish. So that was one of my things I wanted to put out there. And then fish farms. If you have anything to do with fish farms, because as a water plant operator, I don't like fish farms because they create nitrates and nitrates, and they cause blue baby syndrome to small children. And First Nations as well as non-First Nations are putting these up, and there's one actually to the First Nation to the next of us, the Midrand Rainbow, in Shishigwaning, and they're only like a kilometer off of their intake. So to me, like, that's like alarming for me as an operator. Like, I'm not sure how it is with them. Maybe like, what's the regulations to pay attention to that kind of stuff? And then my next thing was about fuel spills. So when we talk about fuel spills, Meldrum Bay has fuel spills quite a bit because the ships that come through there at the quarry. And like, do you guys notify the First Nations? Like, how does that work? Because like, I get notified from Health Canada usually like a day later, and it's like, shut off your intake. So what happens then when we're shutting off our intakes, and who's coming out and testing the water out front to make sure that we're not having these issues? And my last thing is we were in talks with Coast Guard before about getting a volunteer rescue vessel for the west end of Manitoulin, because Jibossing, we have two places of land, right? We have 1,400 acres on Manitoulin, and then we have 900 acres on Coburn Island. So we go through the Mississauga Straits quite a bit to cross over, like weekly. So that's why we were trying to work with Coast Guard at one time, but it never really, it kind of fell through. Where I was trying to get a vessel, because we don't have the funding for it, if we can get a vessel to support the west end of Manitoulin and the North Shore, because I'm 17 kilometers to Blind River, and I pay attention to the water all the time, working in water and environmental stuff. So that's what I just wanted to say. You can answer those questions, just putting it out there.
Sure, I can touch on the, thank you so much. I can touch on a little bit on the first two questions that you have, and I'll see if anyone else wants to chime in on the others. So, what's that?
I was just gonna say, there's so many and they're all so good that I want to make sure we don't.
Yeah, we want to make sure we answer those. For the first one, when you're talking about instance where someone had hit the intake, so DFO does have an occurrences team, which is basically just an incident response team. So it's anything that's going to be causing a damage to fish and fish habitat, where we're not talking necessarily spills or like anything that's going to be put in the water, but as far as like if a company is doing something that is beyond what they're supposed to be doing, or if there's an incident that occurs that causes damage to fish and fish habitat, the occurrences team would be doing an investigation as long as it's reported to us. So I would say, I'm obviously not familiar with the specific incident itself, but if you're finding that M&R is not specifically responding to that, I would say contact us on that, and we can look into it and see what we can do. On the second point, which was on aquaculture, so within DFO there is an aquaculture department, or aquaculture team rather, and they are working with the First Nations specifically on Manitoulin as well, on those farms and doing partnerships on that. As far as your concerns with it, I'm not specifically familiar with the science on that. That's not my expertise, but we can certainly, I can connect you with them, and we can make sure that you have those questions answered and have some discussion on that level. And I'll look to the other team members here for the other two questions that you had.
Okay, thank you for your questions. So your first question was about reporting notification. So any spills that you see should be reported, must be reported to our alerting and warning network desk. So there's a 1-800 number. I don't know if we have it in here. Okay, I can get it for you. So a spill is reported, it goes to this desk, and then there's someone on my team that's always on call 24/7. They'll receive the call and they'll start to do an assessment. So at that stage, one of the pieces will be who's in the area, what's it going to affect. We talk to our partners at Environment and Climate Change Canada and the Minister of Environment Conservation Parks. They're not here. Those are the Ontario folks to find out about water intakes. We have our own, we call it area planning. We have our own maps, charts, as well as Environment Canada has all of the sensitivities all mapped out. So if it's a large spill, we know right away, like, this is what needs to be protected first. We also do part of our area planning in prevention as we go out to communities. We did Manitoulin last summer, actually. Tried to hit as many communities as we could to say, hey, this is what we've got on our maps as sensitivities. Does this look right? And I know it changes every season, every year. So that's why we look to our partners for the more expertise on that, as well as the communities. So a notification from us will go to the Indigenous Relations team, which Guillaume is right there. You can raise your hand, Guillaume. So his team will reach out to the community to let them know there's a spill. Unfortunately, I don't remember that one. Maybe it wasn't reported, but you know, let everyone know that spills should be reported so that we can do an assessment on it, so that we can get those alerts out there. Second part of your question, I'm not an expert, but there is some funding somewhere. Maybe Guillaume can touch on it or get in contact with the right person about getting a community vessel. I know this is new with the Ocean Protection Plan, that there has been some money put aside for that, but I'm not an expert on how to get there. Do you have? Okay, thank you. I know we're running out of time here, so I'll try and be quick here. Kate talked about the National Aerial Surveillance Program. We rely on them a lot. If there's reports of spills, those planes have specialty equipment basically mounted underneath it. It takes photos. It has radars, scanners, everything else that can tell us if it's a hydrocarbon in the water. So we rely on our partners for a lot of things. She also mentioned the response organization. So this is a large privately owned company that big ships must have an agreement with. So if there's a big spill, I know you talked about potentially oil handling facilities. So those facilities also have agreements with these response organizations. These organizations have tons of equipment, lots of boats, lots of boom. You know, if there's something that needs to be cleaned up and we can't find the owner, or nobody's taking action, we can call them and they'll come out with their equipment as well. Vessel, so as I said, Coast Guard is the lead agency for these spills or even potential spills. So that alerting desk I was talking about earlier, we'll get reports from them if there's, you know, engine failure or something. So there's just a vessel just kind of floating adrift that could eventually hit something and cause pollution. We get those as well, and we do a full assessment on that. Shoreline cleanup, we're a little bit part of that in the initial stages, but then we rely on our partners to show their expertise in that and, you know, get the folks together to make that happen. But we sort of are the person that makes sure that all of the appropriate agencies are involved and that all of the land managers, communities are notified, and all of their concerns are addressed. So if it's a large incident, we stand up an incident command post, and there could be folks from the communities in those incident command posts to make sure that we're addressing all of your concerns. I think that's it for me. The Marine Communication Traffic Services, as I said earlier, they're the ones on the radio. So they have the direct line to the ship's captain. If we can't get them on the phone, we'll get them on the radio. So we work in coordination with them, and they put out the alerts as well for vessels in the area so that you know to avoid a certain area. Okay.
So I hope we answered the majority parts of your questions. I will say one thing that really stuck out to me was you were asking how Indigenous communities are included in the response process. And one of the initiatives that we have under the Oceans Protection Plan right now is looking at revamping that whole framework of how that is done. And one of the big parts of that is looking at having a greater role for Indigenous communities in response if they have the capacity and the desire to do so. So it's definitely something we're working on, and we're actually going to be doing engagement over the coming years, even looking at how to develop this framework. So if that's something you're interested in, we'll definitely make sure that you're on our distribution list when reaching out for engagement on that. And we actually just did a What We Heard report, kind of outlining some concerns. So you can see what other communities are saying too, and seeing if it's similar to what you're looking for that as well. Is there any of your questions we didn't answer? I'm sorry, there was so many and they were great, but I couldn't remember them all off my head. Okay, awesome. Yeah, okay, so actually, Carrie, you gave me this number, but Andrew had a different number. So this number is the pollution number, but yours, marine pollution, but yours is all pollution. So let's give that one instead.
This is the Spill Action Center. This is the Spill Action Center number. So any source anywhere in Ontario that you're concerned, land, water, this is the provincial line, but there's an agreement between the province and Canada that anything reported to this line gets immediately sent over to the National Environmental Emergency Center. So that's the Environment and Climate Change Canada group that I was mentioning earlier, and they're open 24/7, so immediately. So the number for this is 1-800-268-6060. It's online. If you were to search for that, the Spill Action Center in Ontario. That's land, water, that's anywhere in the province.
Okay. Does anyone else have questions? No? All right, awesome. Give you guys a bit of extra time back in your day. Thank you so much for coming and giving us your time and attention. I really appreciate it. And if you are looking to talk to us a bit more, we do have adjoining booths in the next room over too, so you can definitely come find us. Oh, yes. I got so excited. Wait. Oh, we're not in the presentation. Give me a sec. There we go. Okay, and then so these are the 4 contacts for Canadian Coast Guard. It's not Amanda, but we put Guillaume because he is the Indigenous Relations and Partnership person, so he'll be your point of contact for Coast Guard. And I will leave that up for you all to take down. Thanks, everyone. I think we're the last one. 2:50.